So this is the first of the rubber duck debugging tasks. What we're going to be doing is we're in Replit, so I've clicked on the link and it's taken me over here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this fork button, and that's going to create a copy of the program and it's going to place it into my area. Now this is what the program looks like. It'll load up in a moment. So here's my code. So on line 1 it says enter a number. It wants me to enter a number. On line 2 it wants me to enter a number 2. So the first number is going to get saved as number 1. And the second number is going to get saved as number 2. Then it's going to say if number 1 is bigger than nums, it's going to compare the two numbers. Is that number 1 is bigger than this other thing, it's going to print out number 1 is bigger than number 2. Otherwise, it's going to print out number 1 is smaller than number 2. So that's what I want the program to do. Let's actually look at what it's doing. So line 1, it asks me to enter a number. As a user, I enter some text, and as Python sees that's text, so it creates a text variable called num1. Here on line 2, it's asking me to enter another number, and by using the int function, we take the text the user entered, so the user enters this. We then turn it into an integer using the int function, and then once we've done that, we save it into this variable called num2. So Python will make num2 an integer variable. So num1 is a text variable, num2 is an integer variable. On this line here, it's going to compare num1 to this thing called nums. Now, if you look in the code, you can't see nums anywhere else. So I think we've got an error here because we haven't got this thing called nums. So that should actually say num2. What we're then going to do is, the other kind of problem we've got is num1, if you remember, is text. This thing here, which we're going to change to be num2, that will eventually become an integer. So it's going to say, is a piece of text bigger than an integer? Now that doesn't make sense. We need two number variables. So straight away, by looking at those first two lines there, I'm thinking, well, there's a difference between these are asking for two numbers, but they're different lines of code. So there's a problem here. And I'm noticing this thing that says int. So I think, well, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the int function and I'm going to add it to line 1. And then I'm going to go and change the thing called nums here to num2, and I'm going to see how I get on. Now, if I just run that program right now, you'll notice that we've got an error here, and it says invalid syntax. Now, you might think, well, why is that? And you might think, well, nums, what is nums? Let's change that to say num2, and then run that again. Again, we've got a problem here. If num1 is bigger than num2, then, well, shouldn't we have a word then there? We've still got a syntax error. So let's go back to think about what's going on. Let's get rid of the then, and we'll go back up here. And we noticed there was a problem with line 1. So let's go and put the int function in here and see how that helps us out. And once we've done that, let's run it. And we still find we've got this line here. So what we need to do is we need to go away and look up the syntax for the if statement and make sure that is correct. So we've looked at line 3 here, and we look at this and we think, well, there's nothing actually wrong with that line there. So maybe it happened earlier. Look at line number 2 here, and what you'll notice, if we compare line 1, which I've just changed, to line 2, you'll notice that we've got two open brackets, one here and one here. But we've only got one closed bracket. So let's put a closed bracket here, and let's run it and see what happens with our program. And I'll press start, and now it's asking me to enter a number. I'm going to enter 5, and then for number 2 I'm going to enter 8, and it tells me that 5 is smaller than 8, which it is. But what happens when I enter two numbers that have the same value? So for example, 5 and 5. 5 is smaller than 8. 5, well, that's not true, that's false. So this is an example of a logic error. So what we're going to do is we need to add an extra piece of code down here that checks to see if the two numbers are the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this second line here and say else if num1 is less than num2, and then we're going to have a colon. And then down here, I'm going to have a final else that says if you remember, if you put a space after at the start of text, it will it kind of avoids things appearing one after another in the same line. At the very end of that line, I'm going to say num2. And we'll run that and see what happens now. So I start the program and it's telling me that I've got an error else if, and that's because I've got an extra space there. So I'm going to run this and it's going to tell me we've still got an error, and then I remember that it should be elif, not else if, and I run it and it tells me I've got an error, and that's because I've got 2 colons. So I'm going to remove that. So I've got lots of syntax errors there. Run this and it tells me I've got a problem with my else. And looking at that, well, I'm missing a colon there, so let's put a colon in. And then if I run that, I enter number 5, I enter number 5, and it says 5 is the same as 5. So that's that program fixed. What I now should do is I should enter some comments saying added an int function to convert the user input into a integer number rather than having as a string. On line 2, if you remember, I had to add missing bracket, and then down here I had to change nums to num2. Down here I changed nums else to L if num1 is less than num2, colon, and down here I added the else and the statement which says both numbers are the same. So there you go, that's that fully documented. So what I can do now is I can take a copy of this code, select it, and then I can go and put that into my Word document as evidence for task number 1. Job done.